Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about estate planning and trust and probate administration, typically from the standpoint of professionals like my guest and me who do this for a living, but also for you so that you can better understand how to communicate with the professionals that will help you out with setting up your estate plan. And really, no matter how simple or complex it is, the issues, the fundamental issues are oftentimes the same. It's just with additional wealth comes more complex mechanisms for achieving those goals. So today I'm very happy to have as my guest Sati McLafferty. McLafferty. I was gonna bungle your name. I've been practicing it, and then of course I did it.
No problem.
So Sati and I met I think a few months ago now. She's based here in California, out in the Claremont area. And so take pity on her because I think it's pretty hot out there now that we've hit summertime.
It is.
I can remember there being in August and thinking, wow, I really need a intravenous water hookup. Sati, as a lawyer, provides a broad range of estate planning and administration services, but her area of most intense interest is in special needs planning. And so Sati, to kind of start us out, tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into this, and why planning for special needs has become such an important part of what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been an estate planning attorney for several years now. I used to practice in Colorado. Originally from California, lived in Colorado for a long time, moved back 2019 actually. So I had my first child at the beginning of 2020, right after the pandemic hit. And he was born with a rare genetic syndrome called Charge syndrome. So with that came a whole lot of medical complexities and time in the hospital, et cetera. So I ended up staying home with him as his full-time caretaker for a lot longer than I had expected to. I was like, I think being type A personality, lawyer type person, I was going to be 3 months home with a baby and then back at work, right? But that was it wasn't in my cards. And very thankful that I had the flexibility to be able to stay home with him and be his caretaker for several years. Also added a little brother to the mix at some point in there. So that kept me home a little bit longer, but totally worth it. I opened up my practice doing estate planning again about a little over a year ago now. And I'm practicing in California now, like you mentioned. But because of my son, I wanted to do something that was closer to my heart and felt more meaningful to me personally. And serving the special needs community is just that. So that's kind of how I focus my practice this time around. And I work a lot with special needs in the special needs community and a lot with families who have minors with special needs. So, similar situation as me. I'm talking to people at my son's school. So it's kind of like a natural group of people that I am around and can help. So that's kind of how I got into doing the special needs planning. And it feels good.
Yeah, I imagine so. So let's start at the really at the basics. We use this. Those of us who are in the business, we use the term special needs, and I think we all pretty much know what we're talking about. Like you, I have a daughter who's special needs, although thank God, high functioning. But for people who are maybe not personally involved in that universe, if you will, talk to us first. What is that? What does it mean who are the people, children, adults, what are the conditions that sort of bring them into this broad category called special needs?
Yeah, good question. So it can be a whole host of things. So, say for my son, he has complex medical needs. He also has intellectual disability and autism. So we kind of hit all of the categories at home. And
Uh-huh.
but other people, they maybe have an intellectual disability, or they are on the spectrum, um, or they have some sort of progressive degenerative condition, where their condition gets worse over time, and so they may be higher functioning, have less needs at the beginning, and then end up needing a higher level of care, down the road. So with the special needs planning, what we're looking at is how do we get these people qualified for government assistance, and if they are qualified, how do we keep them on government assistance? And so that's kind of like that's the legal side of it, I guess, is looking at the government assistance side. Sometimes it makes sense to strive for full government assistance, and sometimes it makes sense to maybe like give them more assets outside of the government assistance, and it may affect their income from the government, but it's a kind of cost benefit analysis.
Okay, and before we get to more of the details of both the legal and the practical side, is it typically the case that a special needs situation starts when a person is a child, or can it be something that develops when someone is an adult, and so then but still their parents have essentially a 25-year-old offspring, that ends up being special needs. I'm thinking of a case, for example, where maybe a child, God forbid, was in an automobile accident driving,
Right.
right, and now they've suffered a traumatic brain injury. And so their ability to work may be attenuated. Their ability to care for themselves may not be as robust as it was before. So how do these situations, or when do these situations start, and how do they develop, I guess?
Yeah, I think you're right on point. It can be at any point in time, right? Because there is the potential for any of us to have something like a traumatic brain injury or some other kind of catastrophic event that prevents us from being able to provide for ourselves. So it can be a birth condition, something like my son's rare genetic syndrome, or it can be an accident down the road when they're an older adult or something. I and then anywhere in between, right?
Right, right. And on the other hand, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to explore this and sort of figure out, maybe the boundaries of it. But for a typical person, as they age, they may be subject to Alzheimer's or dementia. What, how does a situation like that fit into either the more traditional estate planning and or special needs estate planning?
So with the government assistance programs that we're talking about, typically there's age maximum before or at which point we can't do this planning anymore.
Okay.
So we're usually talking about younger to middle-aged adults, not kind of the elderly clientele. At that point, we need to be looking at their own estate planning. So if we're looking at something like a dementia diagnosis or an Alzheimer diagnosis, oftentimes they get the diagnosis, but they still have capacity to do their own planning.
Hmm.
So in that situation, we kind of want to address that planning immediately, if
Hmm.
possible, before we get to the point where there are no more good days. Because even with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, somebody still could have capacity to sign their documents, their estate planning documents, regardless of having the diagnosis. It's a matter of whether or not they have capacity and understand what's going on in that moment, and they are
Okay.
able to, make those decisions for themselves.
And so as a legal matter, as we kind of transition to this part of it, does special needs at least imply that the person, being whose special needs are being addressed, lacks in some way capacity, legal capacity, to take care of themselves, or have I,
Not
slid off the road here now?
right. Not necessarily, right? So some people, they may just have some physical challenges that they're facing, which prevents them from working and it qualifies them for government assistance. But they
Okay.
could be cognitively perfectly fine, right?
Okay.
Or super intelligent or anywhere on the spectrum.
Right.
Um, but they just have something else that's going on that qualifies them for that government assistance. And that includes, I mean, if we're talking about blind or deaf people also. So cognitively completely fine, but maybe we have some qualification for government assistance based on those conditions.
Gotcha. Okay. So there can be an impairment, but there can still, assuming they're at least 18, I guess, right? Because until they're 18, they don't have capacity, right? But there could be impairments in various ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that capacity from a legal sense is impaired.
Correct. That's right.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about this now first from a legal perspective. What is involved in, I guess, determining that an individual is, special needs and therefore eligible or potentially eligible for government? Well, actually, let me take one step first.
Mhm.
Um, when we talk about government benefits, um, would you expand on that? Are we talking federal, state, local? What are these benefits that to which we've been referring that
Yeah.
that we're seeking to use to help someone who's special needs?
Sure. So there's two different types. There's some that are income based or asset based, where this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about special needs planning, versus disability based, right? So if you have a qualifying condition, you're getting these benefits whether or not you have a high asset or high income limit.
Okay.
So those are entitlement based on your disability versus the kind where you're low income, you have low assets, then that's the other kind of bucket. And that's the bucket that we're looking at when we're talking about special needs planning, because that's where what can be affected by, say, inheriting money. So if you inherit money, then we could potentially be getting kicked off of government assistance, which could be terrible because we're looking at both medical insurance, so Medi-Cal in California,
Hmm.
and that can be a huge expense. I mean, if you got kicked off of as someone with ongoing medical needs, say, you get kicked off of your health insurance, how expensive is it going to be to get different health insurance? How expensive is it going to be to pay out of pocket for your medications? There's a whole host of things that are being covered just by Medi-Cal that if you lose 1 month of Medi-Cal, you could be really hurting financially. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned to you before the show started this client I have. I mean, I think 1 month of healthcare could be tens of thousands of
Yes.
dollars, and if it happens to be a particularly bad month, we're probably already into six figures, right? So
Right.
it
Yeah.
can be enormously expensive to care for someone who has
Yeah.
special needs.
And especially, if they have 24/7 care, or if they're in some sort of supportive facility, um, we could be looking at many tens of thousands of dollars for 1 month of care.
Right, right. Okay, so the programs could be federally funded and or administered, or it could be a state program that's either funded by the state or maybe it's like Medi-Cal. It's
Right.
at least partly funded by the
Partially.
federal government, but it's administered by the state of California. So it's kind of a combination
It
of
is.
programs. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay,
And in California, our limits tend to be higher than the federal minimum. So, the feds, they set the bar, right? And then California, because our cost of living is higher, everything is kind of more expensive here. Our limits are a little bit higher, so we receive as a recipient of assistance, they tend to receive more than the federal minimum,
okay.
oftentimes.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense.
Yeah.
I know when I was in the Navy and we got our basic allowance for housing, California, especially Los Angeles, one of the highest allowances in the country because it's
Mm.
so expensive to live here, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So what then going on to the sort of legal side of this, what are we talking about in that realm? What needs to be done? What are some of the issues that need to be addressed?
Okay. So typically, so what I'm talking about when I'm generally talking about when I say special needs planning, we're looking at third party special needs trusts. And
Okay.
what that means is it's somebody other than the disabled individual who is setting up the trust and putting assets into the trust. So it is not that disabled individual's assets that are going into the trust. So this is the situation where we're talking about a parent of a child with disabilities, minor or adult child. They don't have to be a minor.
Hmm.
Um, and so with that, what we want to do to ensure they can stay eligible for government assistance, we want to make sure that the trust isn't distributing assets to that disabled individual that would interfere with those assistance. So we can't give money for something that they're already receiving money for. Basically, that's
Okay.
kind of like the general rule of thumb. That is the bar, right? So with special needs trust, with a third party special needs trust, you can basically just say my trustee has full discretion to give funds whenever they see fit.
Hmm.
And that is the simplest, most flexible way. Because, like you mentioned, cost of living is so expensive here, and the allowance for housing that someone would get is like a max of 900 and something dollars or something. Right. You
Hmm.
can't even get an apartment in a safe place for $900 and anywhere that I've lived in California. I'm sure there are places, but not
I,
many.
I don't know where they are.
I don't
They
either.
exist.
Not in LA County, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
so like that's kind of the situation where the trustee would say, okay, well, we can keep this $900, or we could provide a safe housing option for this person and lose some of that $900, right? So maybe we're providing $2,000 in housing and we're only losing $300 of the government assistance.
Okay.
It's, that's the kind of stuff that with the full discretion, the trustee can make those determinations of whether or not it makes sense to keep full government assistance or provide further assets for that individual that may reduce the assistance just a little bit. So it really gives a lot of, discretion, of course, but better opportunity to improve the person's quality of life.
So it sounds like the main thing is on the legal side is to plan it in such a way that the trustee has maximum flexibility to deal with this means testing that applies to the various benefits. Does that sound?
That is how I like to do it. Yes, I like to provide the most flexibility, especially because I'm working a lot of times with people who have minor children, and those are the people that we're creating the special needs trust for. So these trusts could be going on for many decades. So
Mhm.
I don't know what the law is going to be like. I don't know what their assets are going to be like in 30, 40, 50 years, right? So
Mhm.
from my perspective, I like the most discretion, most flexibility as possible so that down the road we can still make it work really well for that individual.
Mhm. And would that discretion typically include even the expenditure of, the capital or the capital assets that are, being used to fund the trust?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. So a lot of times, we're talking about families who may not have a lot of resources. So maybe we're funding it with just life insurance,
Oh, okay.
or maybe not. Maybe they do have a lot of resources. But either way, we want with making. I mean, the ultimate goal, right, is to provide the best quality of life possible for our loved one. And in doing so, whether that means we're going to completely exhaust the resources of the trust, that may be the case, right? And the benefit with a third party special needs trust is there's no payback provision. You don't have to pay back for services that you've received from the government. I hadn't mentioned the first party special needs trust, but that's the main difference between the two. A first party,
Right.
you're funding with your own resources. But then when you pass away as the recipient, any resources that were spent on you from Medi-Cal, there's the possibility that there's going to be state recovery. So they might recoup those expenses, which of course would probably deplete the whole trust.
Right.
Oftentimes.
Okay, good. We're going to take a quick sponsor break and come back. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So this is Trust and Estates Weekly, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. My guest is Sati McLafferty, and Sati is an estate planning and probate administration attorney who specializes in special needs planning. And we've been talking about what that is and kind of the legal side of it, how to make sure that government benefits are maintained while providing for the broadest range of support for an individual. So, Sati, before the break, you mentioned this idea of say Medi-Cal, for example, being able to potentially claw back assets if it was a first person special needs trust. And so, typically, you're dealing with third party special needs trusts where first of all, that's not an issue, but second of all, it's really more of typically, I suppose, a parent taking care of a child, maybe a minor child or even an adult child. In the estate planning arena, staying on the legal side here for a few more minutes, what are the, I guess, relationship requirements, if you will, between someone who wants to help someone with special needs? Is it required that it be parent-child? Could it be, say, uncle-nephew? Could it be essentially, no familial relation? How talk to us, if you would, about that aspect of special needs planning.
With the third party special needs trust that we're talking about, there's no real requirements there. We can set up a special needs trust beneficiary. You can set up a special needs trust for someone who doesn't qualify for medical assistance, but you just want to have a fully discretionary trust. So it's a really flexible tool because of that. There are far fewer requirements and limitations on a third party special needs trust in terms of who can set it up, who can be the beneficiary, and how the state recovers, because the state does not recover from a third party, like you mentioned. So anybody can really set it up.
Okay, so it could be just a family friend or something like that, if they godfather or something like that, or godparent, I guess.
Definitely, and if I set one up as a parent, anyone can contribute to it. So I can tell my family or my friends who might want to provide assets on their death to my child who has special needs. I can give them the name of his trust, his special needs trust, and they can direct assets directly to that trust. Instead of setting up a whole another one in their own estate plan, they can just say, this portion of my estate goes to this trust that has already been created.
Oh, that's interesting. All the years I've been doing that, it makes perfect sense, but I never realized that people do that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it can be a really good tool if you're expecting inheritance and you think that you're from other family members, say grandparents or siblings or something. If you know or think that they might be providing it for your child in their own estate planning, then having that special needs trust already set up can be incredibly beneficial, just in terms of ease of administration and all of the other benefits.
Got it. Got it. So now let's sort of move from the legal side of this to the more practical side of this, right? Because that's in the end, everything we've been talking about up until now is presumably there to support the actual care and enhancing of the life of the individual with special needs, right? So what are the key issues on what we're calling the practical side of planning for and helping a person with special needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll kind of explain it through my own experience. Okay, so I was my child's primary caretaker for 4 years.
Hmm.
My husband and I decided I was ready to go back to work. I needed out of the house. He was ready to take a break, so we decided to switch. So he's now the
Oh,
primary caretaker. While he was incredibly involved in our child's life, for those first few years, he wasn't at every single doctor's appointment. He didn't go to every therapy appointment. He wasn't making all the phone calls with insurance. He didn't have that experience. So when I decided to go back to work, I realized how challenging it was to get someone else set up to be the primary caretaker. It's taken us almost a year, this whole time that I've been working, to we're kind of in the groove now where he's like, he knows all the doctors, he knows the insurance deal, he can do it without kind of my input.
hmm.
So imagine if I had died instead, right? Or become incapacitated, God
Yeah.
forbid.
Wow. Right.
Um, he would have been stuck figuring that out all on his own.
Hmm.
So that has really guided how I help my clients, because I don't want people to be scrambling to figure that out. It will be incredibly disruptive to the caretaker, one, but incredibly disruptive to the child or adult child
Hmm.
with disabilities. So there's some examples that I like to think of. So there's like a lot of kids on the spectrum may have some sensory sensitivities, right? So
Hmm.
maybe tags in their clothing, and maybe they're nonverbal. So say you have a new caretaker come in, they buy the kid or the adult new clothes. They don't have any idea that they don't like tags in their clothing. The child or the adult is now constantly agitated, upset, and they have no idea why. So then they have to go through this whole long checklist of what could this be? Could it be a medication? Could it be a therapy? Could it be a change in routine? Could it be, who knows, this whole slew of things
Right. Right.
before they get to the tag in the clothing,
Hmm.
right? So we want that kind of stuff documented. We want the transition from caretaker to caretaker to be as smooth as possible. We want it to be easy on both the child and the new caretaker.
Hmm.
So that is the kind of stuff that I talk through with my clients, and examples that I like to give, because I have experienced it, and
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I would hate if, I not being there and then having a new caretaker step in would be incredibly challenging.
Hmm.
So let's just get that down on paper. Let's update it very frequently, and let's make this process as smooth as possible. So that's some of the big stuff we talk about. There's basically, it's called a letter of intent, is what, you can Google letter of intent. The ARC has a really good resource for just a generic one. You can fill out a fillable PDF or something.
Hmm.
But there's lots of information on that. Same with the Special Needs Alliance. They have some really good articles on letters of intent too.
Hmm.
But part of it is that documenting of like likes and dislikes, and then the other part is documenting history, right? So the stuff that I was saying that I had to teach my husband, like, what was the last thing we talked to the doctor about? Where are they located? What are their phone numbers? All of that kind of stuff. We want history of what has worked and what hasn't worked, because we don't want to retry something that didn't work, that I know in my head didn't work, but he doesn't know because he wasn't there in that appointment.
Right.
So we want to document all of that, not just like what they're currently, like medications that they're currently on, but what have we tried and they had a terrible reaction to. What
Hmm.
we want to put all of that stuff onto paper, so that we're not refiguring it all out again when
Hmm.
it's already been figured out.
So, talk a little bit more about this, the letter of intent that you mentioned. Who drafts this? How frequently does it need to be revised? And how does it in practice? How does it work?
Yeah, so I give a blank form to my clients. Like I said, you can find a blank form online very easily, or some resources on how to create your own. I also, because it can be kind of overwhelming, as with anything you add to the plate of a caretaker, can be overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
anything more feels like it's way too hard. So what I try and do is encourage them to just tackle one portion of it a month, or one portion of it a week, whatever feels comfortable to them. I personally have automated email reminders. So I say, hey, do this one section this month, right? And then next
Hmm.
month, do this other section. So we're not completely overwhelmed with looking at a 20-page document and trying to rehash everything that we've learned in the last 25 years of raising this person.
Oh, okay. Wow,
Um,
20 pages. Yeah, that could be.
right. I mean, for instance, it could be for sure. I mean, once we start talking about, because the other things we want to document are social activities, things that they enjoy doing, things that help calm them down or soothe them.
Mhm.
Um, Things that are important to us as parents or caregivers that we have wanted to encourage them to be a part of,
Mm.
community wise or socially wise, or anything like that. Or other things like, so my son has Charge syndrome. The Charge Syndrome Foundation has been a huge help and big resource for me personally to learn more about my son's condition. So that's something that I want to document for the next caregiver, to know that that resource is available to them. Or
Mhm.
like the Deaf Blind Project is another one that is incredibly helpful. Um, so yeah, so I think so. Oh, and then for updating, so basically for starting it, just kind of start, just start and tackle it as you can. And then updating, I recommend just looking at it on their birthday, or on the first of the year, or some anniversary date that you can remember every year. Just take a look at it and see what needs to be updated, because doctors change, medications change, you learn new things, things stop working, whatever it may be. We want to just keep that updated at least yearly, or if you think about it as things change, like immediately. But like I said, anything is kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, for
So
people with OCD like me, like you get back from the doctor's appointment, you're updating the
sure,
letter of
yeah,
intent.
if you can do that, then that's great. And then the other thing that's really important, of course, is letting people know that it exists.
Mm.
So either having a printed copy with your estate planning documents, or have it in a shared folder with the future caregiver, some way to share it with
Mhm.
people. We want to make sure that it's known about, because otherwise it's useless.
Now, we're talking about a case where there is a caregiver, or maybe a primary caregiver, right? What about a situation where there are, or maybe this is doesn't happen, where there are co-caregivers, if you will. So there's kind of a sharing of responsibility,
Hmm.
for to look after the well-being of this individual.
Hmm.
How do you advise dealing with a situation like that, where you know now there really is a consistent need for communication between the two? Let me add another thing on top. Well, actually, why don't you go ahead and ask that, and then I'll add another complication on top of that.
Sure, yeah. So that is a very common situation, to have multiple caregivers, whether it's grandparents, or maybe the parents have divorced. Unfortunately, like, the divorce rate of parents with special needs kids is astronomically high. Um, so it's very common, and I think the biggest thing is just maintaining communication, and like I suggested, possibly a shared document, like a Google Drive document. Like, it could be
Mm,
as simple as that, or an email chain, whatever it is that is easy and useful, that works. Then that's
mhm,
the best way to do it. There is no perfect way, and there's no right or wrong way. It's like, whatever works for the people involved is what you should do, because it's really important to be on the same page with this kind of with the care. um,
right.
yeah.
Okay, so you actually mentioned the complication, which is, what happens if, parents get divorced, and now here's this presumably innocent
Right.
individual, right?
Yeah.
Who, now, isn't living with both parents. And look, the reality of divorce is it is oftentimes not amicable for various
Mhm.
reasons, right? So then, um, you know, what happens there? So,
Yeah, that's really hard. I think it's a really hard one when it's not amicable. I don't know. I haven't experienced whether court involvement would be an option where they mandate that something like this is kept up to date between the two parties. I would
mhm,
say that's an option, but I don't do family law, so I wouldn't know what the practicality of that would be and actually
right,
getting implemented. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that it's an incredibly difficult situation, and when the parties are not talking to each other or aren't talking in a way where you can listen and understand and receive information and give
mhm,
information, then yeah, it's really hard. And I think at that point you do the best that you can as one half of the party, right? You
right,
keep up to date as best as you can, you update your own notes as best as you can, and make sure that
right,
you've done what you can do.
right. And this is not a family law show, but I can tell you that, I suspect that the parents could enter into a stipulation that then gets, um, essentially approved by the judge for a certain level of communication. But even that on a practical level, if a spouse doesn't want to comply,
Right.
then your recourse is to go to court for enforcement, of that stipulation, and that can be, challenging at best. And
Right.
I haven't heard of a parent, jailed for, not, um, properly handling, the other spouse having, partial legal custody, those kind of things. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. Enforcement definitely is difficult. And like you said, going back to court for anything, it's just going to cost more money. And we're spending resources that would rather be spending on our child or our other
Right.
loved one, right? Than spending on lawyers and
Mhm.
court fees.
Right. So continuing on this practical side of things, you mentioned the issues of making the transition, and if it's not inappropriate for me to sort of use your situation as an example, now you're back to work, and don't have primary caregiver responsibility. How do you deal with what I could imagine would be a sense of a feeling that, gosh, I don't really know what's going on anymore, and look, two type A personalities talking here, right?
Yeah.
I know for myself,
Yes.
I at times have a hard time sort of letting go and saying, look,
Yes.
I don't need to know about this. You
Right.
take care of it. But if it were my child, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I want to know, right? So
Yeah.
how do you, if you don't mind my asking, how
Oh
do
yeah.
you deal with that? Amidst all the other responsibilities you have, to be handling these kind of matters, with respect to your clients.
Right. I cry a lot. No. I mean, I'm half joking. It was really hard. I mean, it was really, really hard for me to let go. I definitely am type A personality. I definitely like to have control of things, especially things that are incredibly important to me, like the care of my child. Um, so it's been really hard. My husband have and I have worked a lot on some sort of system that works. So for me, a spreadsheet with all of the doctor's appointments, when they need to be made, what happened at the last appointment, and all the other logistical stuff like address and phone number and stuff like that.
Hmm.
That's worked for doctor's appointments. My son's doctor's appointments are now much fewer and further between than they used to be. So, it's less cumbersome.
Uh-huh.
Um, which may not be the case for everybody, of course, right? 'Cause I know at one point my son had five regular standing appointments a week plus any
Wow.
specialist appointments, and he was seeing, I don't know, like 13 different specialists at some point. So, I went from that to now, okay, every 6 months, every 2 years, depending on the specialist. So it's a lot different now than it was several years ago. So that has worked for us. Open communication, I ask questions because, I want to know and I can't help myself. And I do a lot of reminding when I probably shouldn't do a lot of reminding, but that's, I don't know how to let go. In all honesty, I don't. It's been really hard. And it took me a really long time to let go enough to fully commit myself to my business now, because I started my business and I was still like half at home.
Mhm.
I was staying at home working, which then of course I'm parenting because that's what I did. So I had to get an office. I had to physically remove myself to give my husband the space to take over these
Mm.
responsibilities. And
Mhm.
that honestly has been the biggest help, was just me actually physically getting out of the space.
Not being there.
Not being there, yeah, because then he has to do it, and I have to let go, and
Right.
that's worked for us, but it's been really hard. I don't have a
Yeah.
good answer for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than it's
Yeah.
hard.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So, kind of combining for a moment the legal side and the practical side. So let's say that there is a special needs trust, that assets or the income from which is available to help the individual with special needs. So, um, would a trustee typically have discretion, let's say, to maybe pay for something for both the the beneficiary of the trust, but also maybe a sibling? Because I could imagine a situation where it's like all the focus is on my brother. What am I,
Right.
chopped liver, as we say, in the Jewish world. Is like, and and
Yeah.
and and that could cause some real friction between siblings that would have a deleterious impact on the special
Right.
needs individual, right? So, and sort of, I think this is really kind of the same question. Um, what kind of discretion might the trustee have with respect to using resources to help support the caregiver, in being able to care well, for the beneficiary?
Yeah, those are really, really good, important points. So, as far as the relationship with the sibling goes, that's challenging. So, you can kind of set it up however you want as the person creating the trust. Typically, the special needs trust will only be for the disabled individual. Um, and then we would say direct part of our assets to the special needs trust and part of the assets to um, the non-special needs trust, that for the benefit of the other sibling or siblings, as it may be. Whether you direct 50-50 if there's two kids involved, that's up to you, right? Because do they have equal needs?
Mhm.
Is the other sibling going to be a high earner? Do you know that? Are they ambitious? Are they in their PhD program right now, or are they already, you know what I mean? Are they already working?
Right.
Those are all things to consider. What's their personality like? We can't predict the future, so we don't know. The other thing I also like to remind people is that trusts are living documents. We want to be revisiting these every several years. So as we get to know our kids better, as their personalities develop, as we maybe have a better idea about the earning potential of each child or the needs that they might have, then we can make changes to those trusts
Oh,
as we get
okay.
older, or as they get older. We all get
Mhm.
older. As we have a better idea of what's going to play out, right?
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that we're looking at them at least every 3 years, maybe more frequently if you have a special needs beneficiary. But I recommend to all my clients, whether special needs or non-special needs beneficiary, we're reviewing it every 3 years to make any adjustments as needed, because we don't want to think of this as a static document that's just one and done, and then you never think about it again.
Right. Okay. We're going to take another sponsor break, and then we'll come back and talk about supporting caregivers. Probate and Trust TV, your curated source for the most useful and insightful content on estate planning and trust and probate administration, featuring standout professionals like Bill Gross, Paul Brabelet, James Cunningham, and yours truly. Whether you're a lawyer, accountant, real estate professional, or working on your own succession plan, this channel helps you quickly find the clearest, most practical content YouTube has to offer. Subscribe now to Probate and Trust TV. Spend more time learning, less time searching. So again, this is Trusts and Estates Weekly, and my guest is Sati McLafferty. We've been talking about special needs planning, and right before the break, I asked Sati a question. So, when there is a special needs trust, what kind of discretion does the trustee have with respect to, I don't want to use the word supporting because that sounds too broad, but like helping the caregiver or the co-caregivers cope with this situation? I mean, it's when I say it's burdensome, I don't mean that they don't want to do it, but I mean there's a heavy emotional burden. There can be a heavy physical burden, especially day after day. I can imagine, especially for parents, it's not like oh, 5 o'clock, I'm done, right? You're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of being a chaplain in the Navy, only worse, right? Because sometimes I could say, no, sorry, I'm not on call. Call the other chaplain.
Right.
But you can't do that as a caregiver. And it's I can imagine, no matter how deeply you love the child for whom you're caring, there are times when you feel like, I don't think I can take this another moment. So
yeah,
what can the trustee do to help address, mitigate, I don't know, caregiver burnout, should we call it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, having a child he's only 5, we receive respite care through regional center. We only started receiving respite care recently, like maybe in the past 6 months or something, and we only get 20 hours a month. So it's like.
So I'm sorry, what is respite care?
Oh, good. Sorry, you're right. Respite care is basically a regional center who's through the state. They pay for a caregiver who works with people like my child, right? So
okay,
we have a respite worker who actually knows my kid through school. So she's both works at the school and is also registered as a respite care worker. So it's basically, I mean, it's a babysitter, except that they have special qualifications. So it's not.
Okay, gotcha.
Babysitter would be reductive, but it's but that's kind of like the idea. It's somebody that can come in, that can make sure that your child or person, your individual is safe, they're cared for, you can take a break, right? Okay. So that's what respite is. I don't know the answer of whether or not that continues on into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. But in terms of how the trustee can support, I mean, they can pay for for some sort of other caretaker to come in. They could pay for use trust assets to relieve the caretaker for how, they need nights off every once in a while or whatever it is,
Okay.
Yeah, so they can definitely use resources in that regard.
I mean, can they pay for a spa day for the, or is that going too far?
You could build that into your trust. I would say if you wanted to encourage that, I would have that written out. Maybe not necessarily in the trust, but in instructions to the trustee, which you can do separately from the trust, which may not be legally binding, but it gives them directions on how to use their discretion.
Okay.
And you can use that for kind of a host of things. If you want to encourage certain social interactions or whatever it is. You want to go to the movies every Friday night,
right.
Put that in those letters. And then in terms of like other types of support, I mean, the trust can pay for accommodations for the house, like upgrades to the home if the home needs to be have some remodels done to accommodate the child or adult. Um, they can provide those types of resources too to make sure that the living situation is comfortable for everybody. If that means like a different living situation, then that's possible too.
Okay.
But there's a lot of flexibility in that discretion.
Okay. So putting in ramps or grab bars or
Right.
anything like that, or
Yeah.
um, I mean, would the trustee have discretion to, in essence, sell an existing residence to buy another one that's more appropriate? I mean, would it be
Yeah.
to that level? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
So they have a lot of discretion.
so when someone sets up a special needs trust, initially, will the grantor typically be the trustee as well, or is that not permitted? How does that work?
Typically, yeah. So if we're looking at like a very common situation where the parents are setting up this third party special needs trust for the benefit of their child who has some sort of disability and qualifies for government assistance, then yeah, they would be the trustee because they're the current caretaker. They're currently managing the finances. One thing that I do recommend though is trialing your succession plan while you're still living. So
Oh,
you're the trustee. Say I created the special needs trust. I'm the trustee and the grantor, but I have named successor trustees. So something happens to me, we have successors in place. Same with caretaker, right? We have a successor caretaker plan in place. I want to trial that during my lifetime to see if it's going to work. So have the successor trustee step into your shoes, see how managing those assets works for them. Have the caretaker step in, do overnights, weekends, a week, a month, kind of like, let's see if this thing is going to work because we really want it to work when it's needed most. And so we can do that kind of stuff during life while everybody has capacity and we can make changes still if changes are needed.
so that I've talked to a lot of estate planning attorneys on this show. No one has ever brought up the idea of sort of testing, in essence, live the succession part of yours. And honestly, that is a brilliant idea. And shame on me for not thinking about it because, in the military, that is exactly what we would do, right? We train for, the actual situation. And in a way, that's what you're suggesting
Yeah.
is, get some, actual training, see how this is going to work in practice. And I think it's great not only for the grantor, but for the people who are going to take over the responsibility.
Yeah.
They can be nervous about that too. How is this going to work? Am I going to be able to handle it? Much
Right.
better for them to have a sense of how all this is going to go while, the grantors are still alive and people who have experience can help guide them, help give them confidence, or in the
Mhm.
worst case scenario, be able to say, you know what, I know I told you I wanted to do this and I'm willing to do it, but honestly, I'm just not able to do this.
Right.
God forbid this happened when, the parents were gone. Now what's going to happen, right? Terrible, terrible
Exactly.
situation.
Yeah. And the other benefit too on the other side of the spectrum is now that the individual with a disability, the person that we're talking about, has had this experience of having someone else take care of them, staying with this other caretaker or the caretaker staying in their home with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when something does happen and this new caretaker steps in, it's not brand new. They didn't just, lose their parents and then also have this crazy disruption. They have someone that comes in that's like, they've done this before. We've done trials for a week or a month or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and we know what we're doing. And so for everyone, I think it's more comfortable.
Yeah, yeah, that strikes me as absolutely being the case.
Yeah.
Uh, so we're running up on our time limit here. What other advice, thoughts, have we not covered that we should, for the people watching this or listening to this?
Yeah, I think when you mentioned siblings and relationships, I think that's a big one that we didn't touch on yet. Because oftentimes, as a parent, we're like, "Oh, my kid, my other child would take care of him." Like you said, it is a burden. I mean, doesn't matter how much we love this person, it's a lot of work.
Hmm.
It's always going to be a lot of work, right? It doesn't I can
Right.
love my son as much as I possibly humanly can. It's still a lot of work.
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
you know, and me giving that responsibility to my other child, is that a fair thing to do?
Hmm.
On the flip side of it, do we want that relationship? If my other son is managing Bodhi is my son with Charge syndrome. If Arlo is managing Bodhi's finances for him, do we want that kind of power dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not, because if Bodhi's over here using his talker, his speech device, and saying, "Hey, buy me this, this, or this," and Arlo's like, "I can't," then do we want this?
Hmm.
I
For brothers,
maybe
yeah.
not. So that's the kind of stuff we really want to explore, and that's when people like you can come into play with the professional fiduciary. So um, we're not putting that side on to a
Mm.
loved one who then has to say no, right?
Right.
And maybe creates tension in the relationship. We have some impartial person who's following the letter of the trust and following the letter of the law in order, and they can say no because they don't have that, you
Yeah.
know, personal tie.
Well, and also all of the sibling dynamics and all of that stuff, right? That's been built
Yeah.
up. I
Yes.
will say that doing the work that we do, we absolutely see, every the
Oh
result of
yeah.
every bad familial decision ever made, right? It plays
Right.
out in probate court, unfortunately.
Yeah. And honestly, what I see is that, okay, so the parents are like this glue that holds the family together. They're the only people that, when tensions arise between the siblings, they can kind of tamper it down pretty
Right.
easily. The,
Hmm.
the kids will still listen to them, even if they're 50. They'll still
Right.
listen to them. But
Yeah.
then once the parents pass away, we don't have that checks and balances anymore. And so these deep seated resentments, or "Mom loved you more than me," or "You got everything because you needed more," or whatever this is,
Yeah.
all of that comes to the surface. So then now we have someone in control of someone else's money, and we have this deep hurt, maybe.
Hmm.
And, how does that play out? It's not a great dynamic to put on your kids.
Yeah. No. And it occurs to me too that someone can deeply love their sibling, and they don't want to be feeling these feelings like, mom took better care of you or cared more about you, but these are natural human
Right.
feelings. And so
Mhm.
to put them in a situation where they're essentially in conflict with themselves is also not necessarily a prudent thing to do either. So
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
absolutely.
it's hard.
Well, Sati, this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad to share this knowledge with people.
Good, good. I'll have you, if you don't mind, just hang tight for a minute. I'm going to do a quick wrap up and then we can talk offline. So, thank you all very much for joining us today. I know we have some people watching live. That's always nice to know. If you have any questions, thoughts, if you want to get in, so this is, I always joke, this is the part of the time when I give the shameless plug for my guests because Sally, like all my guests, way too humble to do that. But you can see that the depth of her knowledge, and her personal experience, how well qualified Sati is to help you with this, particular, with estate planning in general, but this particular aspect in itself. So, Sati, with your permission, I will put your contact information in the show notes as well, so that if people want to reach out to you, they can. But if you have any questions, comments, all the links to social media will be in the show notes as well. We'd love to be able to hear what you think. Real quickly, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. is my show, People, these are all Pacific time, People Making Money. So I hope you'll join me later on in the week and would love to see you. And Sati, once again, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really just outstanding information and advice for everyone. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.